the chair of the Arts Committee for the Link. And I'd like to introduce you to my panel. I am thrilled to do this. This is a privilege because two of the people on the panel are my family. So I'll first start with the director and producer. He is a two-time Emmy Award-winning, Peabody Award-winning filmmaker, journalist, superstar. The one and only Philip Bertelsen. And Oscar-nominated producer and researcher, Lise Yasui. And last but not least, my brother-in-law, Chief Technology Officer, Global Chief Technology Officer, responsible for digital platforms for HBO, for Getty Images, and digital advisor to archive advisor to my brother-in-law, Carl Hixson. Okay, let's talk about.
Thank you for coming, Teaneck.
Yes, thank you, Teaneck. Tell us, Bill, how did you do this? How did this happen? We're kind of concerned with this.
The film, or the fact that I ended up with my brother-in-law in the film?
Both of those.
Well, the film came about because the dedication at the end, by the name of St. Clair Bourne, who's a filmmaker of some note, who passed as he started to make this film. And I kind of inherited it from him. So that's kind of how the film found me. And over the course of making the film, Lise and I built a relationship with the family, with Ernest Withers, who you see in the film as the daughter and the keeper of the estate. We were in Memphis one time shooting for some reason, and we, had dinner with Ross afterward. She was so excited. She says, "I have to sit down. I have to tell you something." She's like, Courtney Vance, the actor. He was in our, and he was looking around, and he fell in love with the photos. And I was telling him about our vision for digitizing the collection, and this guy was laughing just about it. And I said, "Roz, don't say another word. Is his name Carl Hixson?" She said, "Yes, how'd you know?" I said, "Well, he married my sister." So. And there's only one brother in the world that can do it like that, so that's how he came to be in the film. I had no idea he was working with the estate or with Courtney at the time.
It was truly amazing and kind of coincidental as well. And my brother Courtney was down in Memphis at the time. So he's down in Memphis working on a project, filming. And we were on the phone. He said, "Carl, I'm down in Memphis shooting. I walked into this gallery. It's amazing. I'm not going to believe it. It's the Withers Gallery." And I walked in. I said, "You know what? I'm going to buy a couple of these prints. I'm going to take them home." So I'm talking to him. I'm going to the archive and selecting prints. And one thing led to another, and he said, "This is beyond me buying a couple of prints. This is amazing." And he and Ron talked about digitizing it, turning it into, I think, a treasure that it is. How can we preserve it? How can we digitize it? Make this priceless collection, preserved indefinitely. So one thing led to another. They invited me down to Memphis. I went to the archive. I've never seen anything like the meticulous way that this archive was indexed, tagged with metadata, which is information about the images, so you know exactly what they're about, is amazing. And you saw it as was excellently documented. You saw the way that the archive is still to this day. And I think it's going to be treasure. As Phil said, the images, the majority of the archive has never been seen before.
These are negatives that haven't been developed.
Absolutely. So that's how I got involved with the project. I think as we had mentioned earlier in my career, I was with the Getty family and helped them build what's now the Getty Images Archive. I think, having seen this collection, this could be another version of what Getty has done. And as impressive as the Getty Archive is, you can search that entire repository, you will not see any of these images.
Wow. Not one.
No, these are priceless. And history doesn't repeat itself.
No.
These moments in time will never be captured again. This is truly a priceless. I get chills just thinking about it.
Sure.
To this day, clearly it's there.
Wow. Wow. Oh. Lisa, tell us about your intense research and development of all this information.
Well, I had the great pleasure of being able to scour that archive, and as Carl says, we think roughly 1.8 million images, and they've only been able to digitize about 15,000 of them at this point. So I got to see those digital images, and they kind of went through the hits, but there's boxes and boxes and boxes, and I'm sure there are more greatest hits in there. So I had the great honor, and Roz Withers and the family, to their great credit, they did not know what we were going to do with this story. We told them very early on that we were going to do with the FBI story because it was all over the news. They had been through the ringer, trying to navigate all of that. And if you still, to this day, Google Ernest Withers' name,
Right.
this FBI story pops up. So to their credit, knowing that we were going to deal with that part of the story, they gave us full, unfettered access to that archive. And I don't know of any other film project. There have been a bunch of books written about Ernest and this FBI story. There have been a number of them, and there were podcasts and things like that, but we were the only project that they gave of Cleveland free reign to, which was so gracious and brave of them. So I got to go through those archives and we have about 360 images, I think, in the film, and it was the hardest decision we think we had to make, which one to use and which one not use. But one thing I do want to also mention is the joy that I found was, the greatest hits, the big civil rights images, the iconic images are just incredible. But what was even more compelling to me was this portrait of a time and of a community that is so tightly knit. This family is beloved in Memphis, and everybody knows everybody, and they're all in those photographs from literally from birth to death. So it's just an extraordinary collection.
Phil, what was most compelling for you in this journey of discovery of Ernest?
I thought that, I had told civil rights stories before, but I never told the kind of totality of the movement, and it struck me that I could do that with Ernest's photos. But with the revelations of his FBI involvement kind of changed all of that. And I think what was most compelling to me throughout all of this was to really kind of be true to the man, who I never got to know, and kind of honor his work at the same time, contend with his treachery, if you will. So it's the complexity of man was all there, not hero, not villain, a little both and, kind of. And so that was really the thing I wrestled with the most.
It's very interesting because also I had never met him, but spending time with Rob and seeing the effect that it had on her and her family and how they're struggling with how to deal with all that. For me, clearly Ernest Withers was kind of a multi-dimensional person, right? He was a historian, he was a hustler, right? He was a family man, and an artist, right? All in the same body. So I tend not to try to get too political about it, but it's very interesting to the point where, is he a hero or not? I look at it in terms of what he's created. It's truly a
He's being modest.
Being very modest.
He doesn't have 1.8 million images, but you've got your share.
I don't know, a small fraction. But his lighting technique, the way that he chose to shoot in black and white, which is even more powerful than color. If you have a certain lighting technique, his timing, the way that he frames his images, the way that he was able to shoot in a very discreet manner and capture very powerful images like they were photos. It's amazing. And the variety of genres also. It wasn't just about the civil rights. He captured sports, he captured entertainment, he captured life. And at a time and a point in history that will never repeat itself. So these are timeless. I mean, what happened 5 minutes ago will never happen again.
Exactly.
And if we ever haven't captured that, we'll never see it again. So that really impressed me about the way he created his images.
In your journey, though, in the process, what did you discover about yourself as a filmmaker?
Mainly something that I get reminded of every time is that filmmaking is a joint venture.
Yes.
I don't know, do it alone as much as you like the thing. And I do appreciate those collaborators more and more every day and year. They grinded it out with us to get it done. So yeah, mostly it takes a village.
Yeah. How long did it take Lisa to go through this project?
Well, Phil really gets the longevity award on this because I think he went over a decade chasing the story. And I was brought in, I don't know what year it was, but it was
Around year 6.
2016. And he told me the story. I thought, oh man, this is going to be 2 years at the most to make this film. 6 years later, we crawled to the finish line. Part of it's the joy and challenge of raising money. To do a film like this, that's quite difficult. So we would raise a little money, shoot, raise a little money, shoot, and just start piecing this together. So I was on it for 6 years. But
Well, it was definitely an incredible masterpiece. Right?
Little bias, but
A little biased, maybe a lot biased.
I have to second that. It's truly an amazing body of work.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen it in probably a couple of years.
Oh.
And as I'm sitting here watching it again, it's a timeless piece. You did a wonderful job capturing it, telling the story, and the full dimension of who he was and that era is a powerful body of work.
thank you. It's fun. Thank you.
I'd like to open the floor up to anyone who has questions for our illustrious panel. Yeah, please.
Thank you. I know it takes a lot to raise the money to make such a film. And we have so many of these wonderful, wonderful films. Does it ever make money? Do you have to sell it to Netflix? And if it doesn't, how do you live? I'm just curious about the documentaries that are so important.
Yes, documentary is a particular form of filmmaking that is not known for its profit margin, but you make money when you make the film. You know, if you want to get down to brass tacks and how you make a living by making films. But as far as profit goes for a film like this, because it was publicly funded and it was paid for in part by viewers like you, as PBS likes to say, it's paid for, you know, so there's no debt on the film. So anything beyond the public television audience is quote-unquote profit, but it goes back into the film. People who funded it get paid what they put into it. So it's just like a rinse, cycle, repeat, you know, when it comes to filmmaking in particular. documentaries, but fortunately I keep the cycle going.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Thank you. Two questions. One, the students that were referenced before we got started, did they arrive?
Yes, they did. Oh, can you please stand up here? Can
All
you stand
right.
up? Yeah.
Outstanding. Outstanding. So the second half of it, towards the archival, I guess, aspect of it, where's the process now of digitizing this multitude of images? And how do we get this into our library, which unfortunately is going through renovations right now, but how do we keep this alive in this community so the next generation can have access to this archival footage and literally type of storytelling? So,
Which is what we're
Well, the Withers Museum is alive and well on Beale Street, famous Beale Street in Memphis, and they do have a website, and they have an internet, as well as all the social media things that we all spend in. And so if you go onto their website, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting exactly but just Google Withers
I think it's
Museum.
Withers Collection.
Yeah, they have a lot of those images digitized, and you can scan through them and look through them. The issue becomes who owns the images. And one thing that Roz and her family have been really adamant about is keeping control of those images, because they could go out into the world, especially with the internet and how easy it is to copy images, and could easily be misused or put in the wrong context for with, you know what could happen. So it's very important to them that they retain some control over those images. But their intent is to eventually, they're raising money too, to raise enough money that they can keep digitizing the collection, because as we've said, there's probably a lot of hidden treasure.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that it has a tremendous value, especially from an institutional perspective. I know that Roz is and still does want to raise the money to digitize the rest of the collection, because clearly there's a fraction of those images that are in fact searchable, tagged with metadata, and digitized. We talked about, and I worked with Roz early on, to design an architecture to actually archive them in a Withers digital library. So that's something that I hope happens, and we're hoping and praying that she has the funding to do that at some point soon. The value to institutions, and one of the things that Roz and her family really want to do is to make these images available to colleges, to schools, and to institutions, because from a research perspective, it's invaluable. These images don't exist anywhere else, and especially in the times that we live in now, you can imagine the value that these images will have from a research perspective. So colleges, universities, school systems, etc. We're hoping that she can fulfill and get the rest of that collection digitized into an archive similar to what Getty has done. So thank you. It's a great question.
I have a question. Sorry. I had to step out when you all started the talkback. I don't know if it was a question I'm going to ask. It was already answered. What was the conclusion? Was it, did you all ever decide as to if he was an informant, or if he was used, or if he was a victim of his situation at that time? Because I know that was a question. And I want to know what, we may never know, but what was the opinion as you all went through all of this?
Opinions vary, but what we certainly discovered and put on display in the film is that he was certifiable, without question, an FBI paid informant for many years, That's how it gets that number, MD338R. But remember that number 338 is in sequence. So there were 337 before him and since. So to give some kind of context to the situation he found himself in, I think he probably did think he was doing more good than harm. I think he also saw the FBI as a paying client. You saw all those mouths he had to feed. He also put them through college at a time when that was virtually unheard of. So, you know, his reasoning is something that only he knows. But there's no question that he was on the payroll of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI.
So how do you...
Okay, so just for me, I think I have a statement and a question. Again, I support an organization that supports many children. And so from my perspective, I think this is a great opportunity and a learning experience for them, right? We have things in terms of history where they don't know specifically the demographics we support, who people are in history that have archived or talked about with the Black experiences in America. And I think this film is very important because during this time, we know as education and things are getting taken out of history, this is very important. And so I want to personally thank you, Maria, for pushing me to bring the children here.
Absolutely.
And again, unfortunately, some of them had to leave, but we really appreciate this opportunity to see this film. And from my perspective, it's now a program that we're going to implement in terms of introducing new icons, so to speak, or new perspectives, new people to our organization and to our children, not just Dr. Martin Luther King. So I just wanted to say that. So
Thank you.
Fantastic. Oh, one of our pop students. Yes.
My name is Lorenzo.
Hi, Lorenzo.
So my question was, during any point of making the movie or just being around in general, looking at the evidence that you guys have had over the years, did you ever sit back and think to yourself wow, as a country, as people in general, we came a long way. Even though it was a lot that happened, did you guys ever sit back and think wow, this is a different time now when these photos and things were originally taken?
It's a great question, Lorenzo. I'll start by just saying these are difficult times too. And I think every moment I felt the urge to say, wow, that was then, this is now. Something else would jump off. And I'd be reminded that, well, then is now. That history does have a tendency to repeat itself, maybe not in photographs, but in deeds and words and actions. And, but I also look back on that time and I look at this current moment and I think to myself, well, we have been here before and we've gotten through it before. I know Martin Luther King Jr., I know Malcolm X, I know Fannie Lou Hamer, I know the story of Ella Baker, I know fighters. And that's what history teaches us, that we come from fighting people, and as long as we're here, we'll continue to fight.
Yes. Continue.
You got me in a sensitive moment. It had to be this week, people. It had to be this week.
Hi, my name is Denise. Thank you. It's a very, very interesting film. I just wondered, in terms of the photographic process, was Mr. Withers operating basically in his house, in his home, in his bathtub for his entire time in Memphis? And was he basically a one-man show? Did he have assistants to develop all these photographs? I realized that a million weren't developed, but obviously when he went to sports events and other events, he had a lot of things available for sale. So could you tell us a little bit about his process, his business, and how he worked?
Well, I think he did work out of his bathtub for very, very many years, as his daughter describes. He eventually became, known as the community photographer. So he, again, from everybody's picture, if you go into Memphis and walk down the street, you'll when somebody's with Roz especially, somebody will stop her and say, your
Father
father took this
picture.
picture of mine, and Ernest used to do that too. Apparently you could walk down the street where you would run into somebody, it took them forever to get anywhere, because I have a picture of your uncle, so he became very successful, as a photographer, and he sold a lot of his photographs to newspapers all around the country, primarily the black press, but eventually he started hitting, the white mainstream, Commercial Appeal, other newspapers and magazines. He worked a lot for Jet, so he started making a very, comfortable living doing that. And at that point, he had a studio. He had several studios, a series of them over the years. He did have an assistant, but the other thing, you hear them at that family dinner at the end, where Francis, his daughter, says, if you could carry a camera bag, you went out with him and you worked. So he enlisted all of those kids to work in that studio. And so it really, truly was a family enterprise.
Just to piggyback on that question, just curious, in your process of researching, did you come across contemporaries of his who were either aware of him or acknowledging him, who also were documenting the period?
Well, I'll start by saying that she was the lead researcher, by the way. She read all those FBI documents. I did.
Oh.
You saw all 7,000.
Oh my gosh.
But to your point, his contemporaries, were few and far between, but most of them were journalists with the black press. Probably the most notable would be Gordon Parks, but even Ernest is a little younger than Gordon, and Gordon was doing a different kind of assignment, for Time and Life. So, yeah, he, in town, who was the family that had, the Hooks, Benjamin Hooks, the Hooks family was in Memphis as well, and they had a little photographic operation, but it was mostly studio portraits, nothing like what Ernest was doing. So in many ways, he stands alone. Even compared to Gordon Parks, who was more interested in taking pictures in other parts of the world than he was in his own inner cities. Ernest wasn't like that.
Do we have any more questions?
Wonderful.
What's the distribution on this now? That we're going to go and talk about it. Where can we see this?
Yeah, well, there's two places. One is if you are a PBS member. Unfortunately, you have to pay for a PBS membership. But if you are, then you can get on pbs.org, and it is on their website, so you can watch it there.
You got to look for the Independent Lens brand. It's part of a series that PBS puts out every year. So this is one of those. So if you go to pbs.org, look for Independent Lens, you'll find the title there. Or through their PBS Passport, which is their streaming app.
And then we have a distributor for the educational market called gooddocs.com, where if you're an educator or a school, you can rent it.
You can license it, rent it. That's how we got here. So, Good Docs, GOOD, Yeah.
Any more? One more question, yes. This is my sister.
My other beautiful sister.
Thank you. So this is for the director and the digital specialist. I'll ask one question and one question for you. As a director, as an artist, and although you're relying on your skill as a documentarian, I want to know how intimate you become in your mind, in your world, when you're crafting the story. Is that something that keeps you up at night? Do you become obsessed? But if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful to me from an art perspective. And for you, Mr. Hixson, and this is something you didn't think about, I'd like to know there's 1.8 million photographs, and only what percentage is digitized? Is 5%, 15%? I'd like you possibly to walk us through briefly how long it would take to actually digitize the remaining 17, and what that means in human time span and workload, and perhaps in terms of, the idea that it could be available at some point if they were to work out these things. So those are my two questions.
I'll try to be brief. I think in answer to your question, yes, with every film, there's a level of obsession with what you're learning about a character or characters, depending on the film. This particular film had a very complicated character at the center of the story. And, you know, so what would keep me up at night was that question. Is he a hero today or a villain? What am I going to learn about Ernest that I didn't know before? And then I would luxuriate in those images. I literally, that whole slideshow motif came from the fact that that's how I got to know these photos. I put them up on the wall, look at them, and I was reminded that, you know, I grew up with a slideshow, you know, and so it felt like this film was that. So you kind of ruminate over the images, over the artist and the subject, and you love them, you hate them, and you just hope you do them justice in the end.
And with regards to digitizing the remainder of the archive, which is a great question, by the way, there's a lot of components that are involved in that. So first there's the scanning, the digitizing of the negatives and or prints, so converting that to digital information. Then you have to meta tag them. You have to index them, make sure each image is meta tagged, so a description. What's the file name, what's the description, is there a caption? That's all extremely important, because once the image is digitized, if there's a file cabinet for the negatives that you saw all in boxes, that's physical film, right? It's very easy to walk into a file cabinet or a box and say, okay, I want this image, it's there, you have it in your hand. Once that asset is digitized, if it's not tagged with metadata, it's virtually impossible to find it, and it's not searchable at all. So when we spoke to Roz and we were designing her system, we were talking about possibly digitizing 100,000 images a year. And that would be with a team of 10 people, scanners, librarians, people that are very well versed in library science, so they can meta tag these images, and then ingesting these assets into the platform that's going to make them searchable. The digital asset library is called it's called a digital asset management system, a DAM for short. But it's a platform that's connected to the web, but it's where all this digital information lives. And it becomes searchable, and then you can have at it. So do the math. 100,000 images per year with a team of about 10 people. It's a multi-year engagement. However, you take the winners, as Lisa said, the best of the best. You start with the hits, and then you continue and continue and continue. But one of the things that, not only making these images available, the hidden asset of this, and one of the values, and we talk about this a lot, is the preservation of these assets. Because negatives deteriorate over time. If you notice in the film, I was wearing a white glove, because the assets from your hands can actually accelerate the deterioration of those negatives. So it's not about just making these assets available, there's a preservation aspect to this as well. So with that being said, great question. It's a multiple year endeavor. It gets down to volume. I mean, we have a team of 20 people. Theoretically, you can do it faster. But what we talked to Roz about was possibly getting 100,000 images scanned per year with a team of 10. And that's going to be part of her fundraising to make this happen. I really, really hope that she has is blessed with the ability to scan the rest of this archive. These are hidden treasures. And remember, most of these assets have never been seen before. So it's truly amazing. Thank you.
Just to add to that, just identifying the people in those pictures was really difficult. You put some of them up on the web, they put some in newspaper articles and said, if you recognize anybody in this photo, let us know. But that population is dying out, so the knowledge, community knowledge is disappearing. So that's a really huge challenge, is trying to find out who these people are and where they are, you know, what day was it. Protest signs are great because it tells you something. And ironically, I have to say, when I was doing the research on the photos, I was able to identify a lot of people in Ernest photographs because they were listed in the FBI file. So I could go down the list and cross-reference the photo in the archive with the one in the FBI file, and he would have identified every single person in especially for protesters.
Do we have time for one more? Is this thing on? Do those documentaries provide lessons?
I think it depends on the lessons you take away from it. Some people take nothing from film, others take multiple lessons from it. It really depends on the viewer. I think there are a lot of lessons in Ernest Withers' story. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
So very